Hi everyone, my name is Dayan Siva Putra, and today I'm going to tell a story about the Renaissance to the deconstruction architecture. The first part, Renaissance. In the world of architectural history, there are periods which declared by the intellectuals. We are starting from the era of Renaissance architecture. Renaissance architecture is an architectural style that emerged in the early 14th century in Florence, Italy, and spread throughout Europe over the next 2 centuries. The emergence of Renaissance architecture is marked by the revival of ancient classical forms. An example of a Renaissance-era building is the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, Italy, and St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, Italy. Throughout the Renaissance architecture, you will note that upon the era has its own unique. By researchers, it can be shown that in this era they're using column elements as foundation and pilasters according to the building. The ceiling is generally decorated with paintings. Paintings do add value to the building, where they add aesthetic and luxurious. The doors and windows are usually rectangular shaped with an addition pediment on the top. The outer walls generally use asphalt bricks, while the inner walls are plastered and the surface is covered with lime. The most important value of the Renaissance architecture that we can know that it's rich on the details of structures. During the Renaissance architecture, architects were inspired by the ancient Greco-Roman ruins and early structures such as the columns of the Pantheon and the Colosseums. The period began to lift the architectural era, nuanced religion, and returned on a human scale, anthropocentric. Focus on classical notions of beauty based on proportion and symmetry mixed with a humanist perspective on architecture. Renaissance architecture sought to create harmony between humans and mathematical proportion by creating classical geometry on a human scale.
Hello everyone, my name is Tiara Karisa, and today I will bring you secondly about modern architecture. Modern architecture can be interpreted as a statement of the soul of a mass, which can adapt to the social and economic changes caused by its era, namely by seeking harmony from modern elements and returning architecture to the actual field, economically, sociologically, and socially. In other words, it can be said that modern architecture is an architecture based on the dynamic non-actional mass composition and most importantly based on the formation of spaces, both within and between buildings. Modern architecture is the result of new thinking about a more human view of life, such as moralist, nationalist, materialist, standardized, and honest, which is applied in the physical form of the building. Modern architecture is an architectural style that emerged in the early 20th century as a response to changes in scale on both technology and society. Modern architecture, or architectural style, developed in all artistic fields, not only architecture, as a mean to adapt and respond to the new technology in machine, automation, and urban design. In the early 20th century, modern architecture developed slowly with the art and craft movement, an association of artists and architects with the aim of restoring the creative fullness of craftsmanship, in conjunction with the Art Nouveau movement and the Deutsche Werkbund, which was also an association of artists, architects, craftsmen, and industrialists. The concern and basis of the modern architecture movement for this artistic activities was the search for new understanding of architecture and design through a purpose, material, and construction. The current modern era began after the end of World War I and included several streams of modern architecture that often could not be clearly distinguished from each other. Rejecting ornament and embracing minimalism, modernism became the single most important new style or philosophy of architecture and design of the 20th century. It was associated with an analytical approach to the function of building, a strictly rational use of the new materials, structural innovation, and the elimination of ornament. It was also known as International Modernism or International Style, after an exhibition of modern architecture in America in 1932 by architect Philip Johnson. The characteristic become the identity of modern architecture are form follow function, more than is material, and less is more. Modern architecture style become featured by an emphasis on volume asymmetrical composition and minimal ornamentation. In Britain, the term modern movement has been used to describe the rigorous modernist design in 1930s to the early 1960s. Walter Gropius and Le Corbusier was the pioneer of the movement, with that later having a profound impact on the design of many public housing schemes in Britain.
The third part is the postmodern architecture. After the modern architecture era, we are moving to the postmodern era, where postmodern architecture is a unified architecture, a mixture of art and science, craft and technology, international and local, which is the result of development of human resource towards modern architecture. Science and thoughts will continue to develop from time to time in various ways, which of course is related to human desires, who always want to change due to increasing problems and needs. It is the same with postmodernism, which emerged as a result of the failure of modernism. Postmodern architecture is an era that marks the end of modern architecture. This term has existed in 1960 to 1970s, not only in the world of architecture, but in other fields. At that time, modern architecture had values of formality and minimalism in its approach, which was considered no longer relevant to the demands of the times. The style of the building is considered not to be varied and monotone, thus giving birth to saturation in the concept. But that does not mean that in this postmodern there are no modernist values. On the contrary, it is very much influenced by the previous era. Postmodern architecture is a combination of traditional and non-traditional architecture style, a combination of modern and non-modern style that apply a combination of two elements, or hybrid, and double-faced are also called double coat. In the 1980s, this style continued to experience such rapid development. Some modern architectural figures include Charles Jenks, Robert Venturi, Philip Johnson, and Michael Graves, as well as examples of buildings with postmodern architectural style, namely the Vanna Venturi House and the Guild House by Robert Venturi. Charles Jenks is the figure who sparked the birth of this postmodern architecture. He mentioned three things that underlie it. First, life has developed because of the speed of communication and human imitation. Second, sophisticated technology to produce products that are personal, while the modern era only produces mass products. Third, there is a tendency to revive traditional or regional values. Postmodern era has its own characteristic, which are contains. First, contain communicative elements that are local and popular. Second, generating historical memories. For example, the application of elements in classical architecture. Third, an urban context, such as a postmodern contextualism architectural building. Fourth, reapplying ornamentation techniques. Fifth, representation. Sixth, metaphoric, meaning that it can be in the other form. Seventh, outcome of participation and representation. 8. Reflect common aspiration. 9. It is plural diverse. The postmodern movement exists because it has a characteristic goal, namely to create an architectural form or layout that is capable of telling a story. So that is this postmodern architecture not only emphasizes function but also aesthetic. Modernism is dedicated to order and simplicity, but postmodern includes complexities and contradictions in architecture. Postmodern style has managed to exude personality, intelligence, ironic view of the elements, as well as the architectural movement of the past. Postmodern has opened a vision of the many possibilities of relativity in an event. Postmodern says the human cannot have an essential or absolute thought. Postmodern always find an alternative to an event, and they understand it as enlightenment of rationality, the Enlightenment.
And last but not least, deconstruction. At the end of the era, deconstructivism architecture is an architectural movement or style influenced by deconstruction that encouraged radical freedom of form and the open manifestation of complexity in a building, rather than a strict attention to functional concern and conventional design elements, such as right angles or grid. It attempts to move away from the convention of modernism so that it can be viewed as constricting rules, such as the notion that form follows function, purity of form, and truth to materials. In principle, the notion of deconstruction can be said to be an anti-understanding of something absolute or certain, so that deconstruction frees us from the thing that limits us. What has existed in the past has become history, so that for the understanding of deconstruction, there is something relevant to be repeated. Deconstruction always demands to present something that is always new. Thus, deconstruction can be understood as a never-ending process. Deconstruction architecture recognizes the existence of space in between or gray areas, so that the design of deconstruction architecture focuses on exploring these gray areas. One of the most visually striking type of art yet developed. Deconstructivism is a weird-looking but intensely creative style of the 20th century architecture that first emerged during the late 1980s, particularly in Los Angeles, California, but also in Europe. A strand of postmodernist avant-garde art made possible by the use of design software developed in the aerospace industry. Deconstructivist architecture is opposed to the order rationally of geometry, preferring a non-rectangular approach to design which typically distorts the exterior of a structure, subverting modernist value in the process. Some intellectuals believe that the constructivist philosophy is opposed to postmodern art as well, although what practical consequence this has rather unclear. After all, a deconstructivist architect has to obey modernist and postmodernist law to science whether he or she like it or not. That's all from us. Thank you.